Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in.
Welcome into another episode of the podcast, everybody. I'm excited to be here with you again this week, talking about something. Do you have like an 8-year-old or 9-year-old, 10-year-old, sometime in that age range? This podcast is going to be like almost creepy, probably, in describing what's going on in your kid and in your life. And if you don't have a kiddo that old, will be a good little forecast for you about what's to come. And if you have a kid older than this will be a really great way for you to understand how you got where you're at with this teenager that you're dealing with. So I think no matter how old your kids are, this topic is going to be germane. And that topic is what is called in the Waldorf world the 9-year change. And not to get too far of a digression into Waldorf stuff, especially because I am certainly not an authority on Waldorf stuff, but the Waldorf school and pedagogy and all of that stuff was developed by Rudolf Steiner. And it is really this holistic way of looking at the child. It puts a lot of emphasis on, sure, the three R's, but also um, creativity, artistry, musicality. Like children in the Waldorf school are learning music. They are doing theater and acting things all the time. They are constantly creating art and visual art. And they also put a lot of emphasis on the whole child and the whole brain. So work with your hands, handiwork, whether it could be cross stitching or knitting or woodworking or those kinds of things. So, and then I would also say the other thing about Waldorf that I love is that it looks at the whole child in the sense of not just this child's intellect and intelligence, but also in their spiritual wellness and their emotional wellness. And a couple years ago, I moved my youngest two kids from a traditional school setting to the Waldorf school setting. And it was like night and day change for both of them in terms of their like academics, their happiness, their just holistic wellness is through the roof compared to the schooling that they were receiving before. And that doesn't mean that that's Waldorf is for everybody. In fact, I have a older kiddo who is going to our traditional local neighborhood high school, and he would be miserable at the Waldorf school. So Waldorf isn't for everyone. That's not my belief. There are some people who believe that that is true, that I'm not one of those people. But for these particular kids, it is the perfect school for them. And one of the great things that I love about having moved to the Waldorf school is that I'm learning lots of new stuff. And that brings me to my confession for you all this week. Um, this part isn't really a confession, but if you know me, you know that I am a voracious learner. I always joke like I'm never not getting a certification or I'm never not in some sort of a training program or whatever. It's not because I need it or I don't feel adequate or anything like that. I just love it. I just love it. So you all know my most recent certification and training program was in Enneagram practicing and Enneagram coaching, which I'm obsessed with. And I'm actually super pumped because I just got asked to do an Enneagram workshop with the teachers at the Waldorf school. So it's like, oh my God, worlds collide. I'm so excited. Um, but going to the Waldorf school kind of showed me some of the things I didn't know yet. And I did feel a little sheepish, to be honest, as a parenting expert, to be learning things that seem quite basic to all of the people who are steeped in the Waldorf pedagogy and zeitgeist. And the 9-year change is one of those things. And so before I joined the Waldorf world, I really did talk about how kids change starting at age 9, but I really lumped that change into kind of a larger thing of like pre-adolescence or that tween time when your kid isn't a teenager yet, but they definitely are leaving childhood behind and they're kind of in this like morass of teenage behaviors starting to emerge. And so if you've ever listened to any of my like workshops or podcast episodes or read my blog posts or received my emails about teenage and tween stuff, you will have seen that all of the traits that I talk about, I kind of lump that pre-adolescence into, one chapter. And that's my confession for you, that I was doing that and I shouldn't have been doing that. Not that what I was doing was wrong, but I would say that it was probably a little general. Because, being steeped in the Waldorf world, I have really started to understand that the beginning of pre-adolescence around age 9 is something very different than what we see in kids who are like 11, 12, 13. So if your kiddo is 8, 9, 10-ish, your child is in this chapter of life that the Waldorf school anyway calls the 9-year change. And there's lots of other psychologists that have called it other things and observed this change, but we're going to call it the 9-year change because that's a really easy way to talk about it, to be frank. Although I was talking about it with somebody else and they're like, well, why does it have to take 9 years? And I was like, no, no, no. Let me be very, very clear. It's not called the 9-year change because it takes 9 years. It's called the 9-year change because it happens around age 9. Okay. So what is happening around age 9? So if you have a kiddo in this age bracket, you may have noticed your kid starting to show some new confidence and competence in some stuff, which is really cool. A little maybe more courage and, go out and conquer the world vibes. That's really neat. But you might also have noticed them acting out rudely or defiantly, starting to have like really intense emotions that they might not used to have had, getting mad, being irritable, sometimes getting self-righteous. So I have a 10-year-old, and one of the things that he has started doing way more in the last year or two is getting into arguments with me where he is just like so indignant and self-righteous. Like he does that thing where it's like, I'll set a boundary with him and say, okay, Sky, well, I'm happy to talk to you when you can be calm, but right now you're speaking to me disrespectfully. Let's say I said something like that. And then I follow it up. Like I will not, I'm done talking now until, you know, we have better vibes between us, right? So I'm not talking. And then he does this thing where he sits like within earshot of me and is like, oh, great. So now you're not even going to talk to me anymore. How typical. You told me this, this, and this, and now you won't even answer me about it. And I'm trying to talk to you, but you are ignoring me. Like this like attitude of like almost like holier than thou, contemptuous like tone of voice kind of thing. So that's a really typical thing with this age. You might have noticed your kid being more fearful or anxious about things that didn't used to worry them. So that's something that absolutely happened with Sky recently. Like the Waldorf school goes and does overnights, like camping trips together every year. And he went on the one last year. He's very comfortable. He's gone away to sleepaway camp like every year since he was in first grade. Now, all of a sudden, he was crippled with terror about going on this 2-night camping trip because he was homesick. He didn't want to leave. He had separation anxiety. And Mike and I were both just like, where is this coming from? Like, what is happening now? Okay. So that's something you may notice. You might also notice that your kiddo is starting to feel concerned about fitting in and how others see them, or social pressures in ways that they didn't used to care about before. And to me, that's one of the changes that I sometimes breaks my heart a little bit when you see that happening with kiddos. But it's normal. It happens this time of life. You might notice your kid beating themselves up more than they used to, or being, hard on themselves. And you also might notice your kid being more critical or questioning of authority in ways that they didn't before. So all of these things are really characteristic of this 9-year change. And so let's talk about why this is happening. And I'm really sorry if you have younger kids and you're listening to me describe all these things and thinking, oh no. I really do feel that there's like a honeymoon period with with most children, where they when they sort of like get out of, or they're like in the older stages of the toddler age, so maybe like 4 years old or something like that, until around age 9, where it's like, okay, I can kind of catch my breath. You have this little calm moment. You're in the eye of the hurricane or something. And then starting at age 9, it all ramps up again. So catch your breath. If you're in that honeymoon period, soak it in. Don't worry about the future. It will come when it's time, and you'll handle it when you have to cross that bridge when you get to it. But but yeah, so that's what the 9-year change looks like. And let's talk about why. Oh, why does the world do this to us? Why is this happening? Um, so I actually think this is a really interesting and fascinating age or phase of life. And this is one of the reasons why I love Waldorf. Is there's a real marriage between the spiritual part of life and just this concrete, tangible, terrestrial, boots on the ground experience of living day to day. And I love that. I love when something that's esoteric and almost like magical becomes tangible and accessible like that. So this is a really great example of that. What is happening inside a person's brain when they reach this age is a newfound awareness of the fact that we are separate from the world around us, that we have an inner world, and that inner world is separate from the outer world, that I'm an individual that is not the same as my parent or my sibling or the people in my classroom. I'm me. And as soon as the the psyche has this awareness of me and you, us and them, to use a common expression, as soon as there's a me and there's a you, now my brain starts doing tons of stuff with that awareness. I start to compare myself to the world around me. And maybe sometimes I come up short, and maybe sometimes I'm ahead of the game and I'm better than you. Right. But I'm doing that comparison thing, that compare and contrast thing that I probably didn't do a whole lot before. In fact, when you read some Waldorf literature, we even can see language talking about how before this 9-year change, like kids don't really see themselves as apart from the world around them, not just the people around them, but the world around them. Like they are a part of nature. Trees are beings just like we are beings. You could be one with the grass when you're like laying in your backyard. Like this oneness that children experience. It is a beautiful thing to see. And this is why when we see younger children, they don't really have a lot of social anxiety about acting weird or sticking out or doing things that are strange. They're just living and being one with their experience and letting it all hang out. And right around this age, they start to have that consciousness of like, I'm separate from the world around me. There's a me, there's a you. I'm going to compare and contrast those things. Now I actually see that how I show up in the world might be unwelcome, or it might serve me, or it might not serve me. I might be cool. I might be a dork. I might fit in. I might not fit in. Everybody else is doing this thing. And I notice that. And I notice that I'm not doing that thing. And what does that mean? Does that mean that I'm not a part of this group? Do I need to do what everybody else is doing? What does everybody else think about the fact that I'm not doing what they're doing? You see, now this makes sense, right? Why all of a sudden your 9-year old who would go to school with a snorkel mask on and their pajamas last year is really worried about what everybody else is wearing today? Where did that come from? It came from their awareness that they're a them and you're a you. That's what's happening inside kids' brains. And to take that even further, that separation that we experience from the rest of the world is the beginning of a period of rapid ego development. Because think about what your ego even is, like, and why your ego even is. Though that part of your personality, that part of your psyche exists to help you interface with the world around you. Like your ego is the reason that you don't take your pants off in the middle of the grocery store. Your ego is the reason why when someone says, thank you, you say you're welcome. Your ego is the thing that helps you exist in a society on this earth. And that, of course, is going to be the logical thing that develops once you start to realize, like, oh, I am an individual. Now I have to figure out, well, who am I? And how does that fit with the world around me? And how can I show up in a way that gets me what I want from this life? Right. And so now we start to realize, like, oh, all of these crazy behaviors from our children, they make perfect sense. First of all, now that I'm a me and you're a you, I care. I care about how I fit in. I'm starting to think about that stuff, just like I just said. I also might be worried about the possibility of things that could happen that I wasn't worried about before because I was just like one with everything and it's going to be fine and it doesn't really matter because like I'm a tree and a bug and a piece of grass and a bird and a human. I'm all of those things, whatever, everything's fine. Well, yeah, after a while, once I realize I'm actually not a tree or a bird, I can also realize that, like, shit matters basically. Also, once I start doing this compare and contrast thing, I might have some opinions that aren't the same as your opinions. And I might realize that I'm different than you. And I might not really like the fact that you have an idea of what you want me to do or how you want me to be. And now there that comes that rudeness, that defiance, that criticality, that questioning of authority. We are trying to figure out, like, how do I get to be me? How do I get to be an individual? And how do I get out from under the sort of control and domination of the people around me? That's a very big deal for kids. And you can start to see how these are all the little seedlings that will grow into teenage behaviors down the road, right? So this is what's happening inside our kids' heads. And by the way, just the fact that they have this new awareness is a very topsy-turvy experience for them. Like, the world is different than it was before. How could this be the same world I've been living in this whole time? But all of a sudden I see it so differently. It feels like night and day from how it was before. And they are leaving behind this sort of like beautiful, like ignorance is bliss almost place. Even things like mortality become part of their awareness. And I can share a story from my personal experience. Like, it just so happened that my grandfather, who was sick with leukemia, passed away when I was 9 years old. And that occurrence in our family completely blew my mind. I started to think about, well, what is death? And like, oh my God, I'm going to die someday. And I started to really confront the fact that, like, I am mortal. Like, my life is finite. And what must it be like to be dead? And oh my gosh, I mean, just stuff that are like existential questions that just simply don't occur to us when our brains haven't expanded to allow for these concepts to even exist, right? So things are really messy inside for a 9 year old often. And it makes perfect sense that they are acting the way that they are. And they're literally experiencing a little bit of an identity crisis. The world is different. I am different. Who am I? Holy cow. Right. So what do we do about this? I mean, the really, really cool thing about the work that I do with my clients is that, there are two sort of like, there are really only two rules. One of those rules is that we do our best to be authoritative in our parenting, which you hear me talk about all the time on this podcast. It means what? It means two things. We have emotional attunement with our children, and we are in a leadership role with our children. So, authoritative parenting, that's the first rule. The second rule is that we are looking at this through the lens of relationship. And so the rules never change, which is awesome. It doesn't matter how old your kid is, and it doesn't matter what crazy bonkers moment they're going through. What kids need from us never changes. They need us to show up in integrity in our relationship with them, and they need us to be emotionally attuned to them, and they need us to have that control and leadership element with them. That's it. And that's exactly what your 9 year old needs. That doesn't mean that what really changes isn't the rules, right? It's how easily we can give what our kids need to them, or how easy is it for us to follow those rules. And I would say that this chapter of life when your 9-year-old is like transmogrifying in front of your eyes is one of those times where it can be really hard to follow the rules. Same thing with toddlerhood, happens again during teenager years. Like there are moments when the rules haven't changed, but I'll be damned if I can actually do it. I just can't do it right now. And so if you're feeling that way, you're not alone, you're super normal. It can be reassuring to know, like, okay, actually, even though the world feels like totally crazy because my kid has like had a personality transplant, actually parenting hasn't changed. I actually do know how to do this. And also sometimes we need help. Like that's why I have a job. We need help to figure out, okay, but why is it so hard for me to do this right now? We need help figuring out what does it look like to do this right now? Because like, what it looks like to be emotionally attuned, but also holding a boundary with a 2-year-old is very different than what it looks like to be emotionally tuned, but also holding a boundary with a 9-year-old. With a 2-year-old, you might be like, oh, looks like you're having a tantrum. I love you so much. I can't wait to see you when you're calm. And you just kind of walk out of the room and let them run their number. And that's great. You're not going to talk to a 9-year-old that way. It's frankly insulting, right? But you still need to have that same energy of like, dude, being 9 is rough. And I can tell that you are exploding with stuff right now. And it's also not cool to talk to me the way that you just did. So I'm going to take some space and let's talk about it when we're both calm. That is a much better way to talk to a 9, 10, 11-year-old, right? But the actual elements are still there, right? Easy for me to sit here in the cheap seats and talk about it. And depending on the circumstance, depending on what's going on in your head, how it feels in your body or in your heart to be talked to that way, you might not be able to access that at all. And that's where someone like me comes in. It's my job to help you figure out what makes it hard and do the work around that thing so it doesn't make things hard anymore. That we're not getting stirred up and triggered by our kids. And then to actually figure out what do we do? What are the words I want to say? What is the consequence that makes sense here? What is the boundary I want to set? Do my boundaries need to change because my kid has changed? All of those are the work of coaching and working with a coach. So if you feel like you're ready for that, if your kiddo is going through this crazy time, whether it's this crazy time or a different crazy time, it might be time for us to talk. So you hear me every week talk about setting up that discovery call with me, and it is always available to you. It is free. It's an hour and 15 minutes that we get to sit down and get to know each other. You get to share everything with me. I will listen and learn all about you and your circumstances, and then I'll give you my feedback and tell you what I see and what could change and help you see that hopeful vision that I can see when I talk to you. And we'll talk about what it looks like to actually implement all of that stuff, whether it's with me or without me. So I hope that was helpful for you. I hope you are, starting to see your 9-year-old through new eyes, maybe. And I look forward to seeing you in a discovery call soon. And I'll talk to you again next week. Bye, everybody.
The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/Kaplan call, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.